Welcome back to the Life in Bomb City podcast. My name is Aaron Faber.
Dr. Beth Rodriguez.
We are coming to you here live from the Panhandle PBS FM 90 studios on the Amarillo College campus, social and behavioral sciences.
We're back again. I'm excited that I really am. I know I said this last time, but it's just good to be back in here.
Oh, certainly. It's always good to be able to visit and have a good conversation with my wonderful colleague. And, you know, we have these conversations every single day.
Absolutely, yes. And that's what we figured. You know, we do have really good, intense conversations that we've had, not only with just us, but anybody in our department. And we thought, you know, this might be something that we should, you know, continue to discuss with other people as well. And so it's not like we just randomly come in here and say, oh, well, we have these new discussions. We've been talking about pretty much all these topics before we actually come in and do anything with them. So, you know, it's fun to actually get it and to help, you know, get it out there so other people can hear and listen too.
Right. And they tend to have to be like extensions of things that we talk about in class. And because we have an hour and 15 minutes in class and we do 8 weeks in accelerated format, there's always something it seems that is kind of left hanging and we're cut off in mid-sentence. Particularly, especially for me, I know that I just missed a class at 1:47 the other day, and I looked at the clock and I thought, oh.
Sorry, guys. Yeah.
Y'all got to go.
Yeah.
I got to let y'all go. So they all go to work and they have responsibilities that are sometimes beyond my ability to fully understand with what they do and what they have going on in their lives. And I just love our students to death.
Yes, me too. I'm excited to have them back in the classroom.
Oh man, I cannot wait to get to see them, look at them, see the expressions on their face. They can smile, laugh together, cry
right,
together.
More of that discussion instead of just I feel like I'm just talking at them at this. I mean, there's some discussion, but not near what you have person to person. So
no.
I'm excited. Okay, so what are we talking about today?
Well, today we are going to be visiting about a topic that I think we can conclude is probably a fairly controversial topic. That might be the understatement of the year. However, I think that it's important for people to know that we are having this conversation and we don't want to hide from it. We want to walk into it with eyes open. With what is the statement that they use in Friday Night Lights? With open eyes and full hearts.
Yes, that's right.
And that, to me, is something that we can learn from. This is something that has pushed me and driven me into a position where I'm just reading, not emphatically about all history, but certainly about the topic of the day, which is anti-racism. And
I love how you anti-racism, because I mean it really is, and that's so it's kind of. That's the point is, you know, a lot of people don't want to talk about it because it is kind of like a anti-racism. And I wish it wasn't that way. And what's crazy is I don't know that, I mean, I've had these discussions before, but now they've taken on a different intensity than they ever have because of all this stuff that's going on and, you know, all across the world. But my biggest thing is when I'm talking to my kids, I was talking to my husband this morning, and one of the things that he really did bring up was like, this is not new. This is not new. This has been around forever. And it's not, you know, it's not going to be solved in an afternoon. It's not going to, it's not, you know, all of a sudden a problem. Like, it's always been an issue, and there's always going to be people, which is really sad, but it's true. There's always going to be people who are on the extremes of every side of every issue. And that's why there are things that we're worried and we get caught up talking about it, because there's always going to be different sides on this one.
Right.
And
yes.
Which is kind of different to me, because I've never really thought that people around me, I haven't really been like, oh, they are definite racist. I've never thought of, you know, a certain group saying, oh, just because you are who you are racist. Now, of course, I guess if there is a definite racist group, then yeah, they're going to be the racist group because that's how they identify on purpose. But I think people in general aren't out there maliciously evil. And
Right.
I don't know, is that a fallacy of mine?
Well, I think that, it deserves conversation, right? Especially in reference to anti-racism as an idea and as an ongoing conversation in America. I think you and I can both get on the same board, as well as I think probably almost everybody else. I think we have policies set up in places like Germany, for example, that do not want the swastika flown, and I can understand why.
Right.
They don't want the swastika flown because it is a remnant of a time long past, and that cost 50 to 70 million people their lives. It was an ideology, and it was an ideological conflict that took place in the 20th century, and it's something they're embarrassed by. And we have family members that went over to Europe and gave their lives and gave a part of themselves that they could have never gotten back because of what they saw and what they went through. And it was a traumatized generation. Now, they were tough, but I'm going to get caught up thinking about the World War II aspect.
Yeah.
I don't want to, though. That's not the point. The point is to apply the lessons that we learn historically and understand them in the present as we're moving forward, creating new things and trying to understand other people. So in my world with government in Texas and government in the United States of America, at the federal level and at the state level and at the policy level, I'm always thinking about, and Dr. Decker was getting on to me about this yesterday. She gave me a special task.
Oh, she did.
We could talk about it because
I love that.
part of my personality tends to look at all the ways that things can come back to get you a little bit later, and I don't really know where that comes from. It's just
policy.
It
sounds like it.
Yeah, maybe it's policy oriented. Yeah. And I think that's what you learn. So finding out what assumptions people have about their world, particularly their worldview, what worldview assumptions are people having? Because we all have assumptions. I grew up in a small town. That gives me certain inclinations to believe certain precepts about other people, and that can help drive my behavior. Is that right?
Sure, absolutely. That's what an attitude, that's the whole purpose of your attitude, right? Of your evaluation of something is to drive your behavior. And sometimes, no fault of your own, just through experience, you don't have the knowledge, you don't have the experience, you don't have a well-known evaluation of something, so therefore the behavior that follows is kind of, it's not necessarily a conscious, full-on whatever behavior you would want to engage in. So sometimes you just respond. We talk about, saying that, like the idea of stereotypes. We function on stereotypes because it's a cognitive shortcut. It's easier. Our brains, our bodies are like the most efficient machines in the whole world. Like, they do not want to have to do extra work if they don't have to. So if we have an automatic stereotype that we can go to that's a cognitive shortcut, it's easier.
Right.
And
that makes sense.
And it is, and everybody does it. And you can't say, oh, nope, I don't. You do. And it's okay, because that's how your body works. It's just that what you have to now be aware of that. And if your action is really, hurting somebody, then that's when you change it. Okay. And my biggest thing is that if you are doing something and it hurts somebody and they don't tell you, then you can't, how are you held responsible for that? How am I supposed to know how you're feeling if you don't talk to me? And I think a lot of this whole idea of anti-racism really does come down to communication and understanding and experience. And I don't think there is one group of people who needs to teach another group of people anything. I think that everybody needs to experience things together, because it doesn't matter, like, especially with age, it doesn't matter. There's young people who've had a lot more experiences with different things than people who are older, but there's a lot of older people who have had experience as well. So I think it's a learning environment. There's no teacher student. I think it is a cooperative, hey, let's figure this out, instead of having one versus the other. That's my biggest thing. And that's what I see a lot of times, well, not a lot of times. I'll say, because that didn't make any sense what I just said. It was like the most contradictory. A lot of times, sometimes, I see that, it seems anytime we talk about this, there's a polarization. You have extremes with the whole anti-racism movement. And I think that when we look at the extremes, people get so angry. Because, anything on the extreme is always like, there's no cooperation. There's no working together in those extremes because you are in the extreme. Like you 100% disagree with something that somebody else 100% agrees with. And so with those extremes, it causes lots of tension. And, and I'm not saying that someone needs to give in. It's just that maybe it's the extreme people who we're not going to be able to bring to a consensus, if that makes any sense.
No, I think it does. And those assumptions that we were mentioning a moment ago help drive our expectations out of a conversation. They help drive our expectations out of policymaking. They help drive our expectations out of what we consider to be safe in a classroom. To talk about what is safe ground in a classroom when the actual structure of the class itself is being rocked at the bottom, at the foundation of it. And what do I mean by that? Well, we have a certain list of assumptions I'd like to just kind of throw out there and visit about. The term anti-racism is a term that has been largely attributed to the work of Ibram Kendi. Dr. Kendi I believe he came out of Harvard.
Sure.
PhD from Harvard.
I'll find out.
I want to make sure, but I have read his book, and if you haven't read it and you're afraid to read it or you don't want to read it, I suggest you read it because it is very well written and it is hard to read. As a white man, it's hard to read. And I can say that with all the confidence in the world. I just don't want anybody to make a mistake about that.
Real quick, he went to Temple University.
Oh, yeah, Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. So that's hey, we have Dr. Key. He went to Philadelphia. I wonder if they ever.
I doubt it.
No,
I think
okay.
they're a little.
There's an age difference.
I mean, if he listens to this, he's going to be really. He's going to be like, okay, thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks for throwing me under the bus.
But he did. I think the reason you did thank Harvard is he did a lot of the research and stuff that was printed Harvard.
And we just did that.
Information.
We just now did the Harvard course, and they were mentioning they mentioned their friendship with him regularly. But he is at Boston College.
Yeah, he actually has a center for anti-racism at Boston College,
and which I really want to visit.
Yeah,
I would love to visit. I would actually love to sit down and visit with him about whether or not that was the intention from the outset. Whether or not it was the intention to make these challenges. I would just like to run through some key assumptions that are a part of this, a part of the worldview that is here. So. The whole worldview comes out of looking at the world through race and only through race. That's the predominant assumption about people, is that we are driven by this underlying concept that we may or may not be aware of, that is part of a construction of the world around us. That race is socially constructed. The term, the idea, the way it's practiced is part of our social thought and our relationships. It's normal, it's ordinary, and ingrained into society, and it makes it very difficult to recognize. That the ideas, the traditional claims of neutrality, objectivity, and color blindness need to be contested in order to reveal any of the self-interests of the dominant groups. The social interest or social justice platforms and practices are the only way to eliminate racism and other forms of oppression and injustice, and that the experiential knowledge of communities of colors or their unique voice is valid, legitimate, and critical toward understanding the persistence of racial inequality. That communities of color are differentially racialized depending on the interests of the dominant group, and history and historical context must be taken into consideration in order to challenge policies and practices that affect people in color. The ideological contestation, deconstruction, and reconstruction of race is often demonstrated through storytelling and counter narratives. That is a lot to digest. And so you can imagine, hopefully our listeners can imagine how much there is to talk about. We are not going to be able to get to all of this today. Just, it's impossible, but we can talk about some of the basic things that I think that we can help try to explain and hopefully digest with alongside you.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the biggest thing is to start a conversation and, not, again, like the idea that, okay, I'm listening and I'm willing to learn, but you also have to listen to me and you have to be willing to learn as well. So, I mean, it's not a you against me kind of situation, because when that happens, right, no one's going to be talking. It's going to be a lot of disagreement and, on each other's face. And that's not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is just bring up the conversation. Okay, so the first thing that I think is really important is we have to define race. Like, what is racism? And it's been a very interesting journey that we've been on talking about this, because to me, from the very beginning, when I, from a kid, the idea of racism was if you treat somebody different because of the color of their skin, that was considered racism. It didn't have anything to do with anything else other than if I decide that you're going to be a certain way, or I'm going to treat you a certain way just because of the way you look, pretty much, then that's racism.
Right.
That's how I still function, because that's what I think. But that's not necessarily the definition anymore. Right? I mean, that's what I've learned, is that through talking with people, and I'm like, I don't, like, racism is bad. And I don't think that any group, I don't think any group, because of what group they're in, is just automatically racist. I don't think that happens. I don't think that just because you are born a white male, a white female, a black male, a black female, an Asian male, Asian female, Hispanic or Latino, whatever. I do not think that means that you are, just because of your color of skin, that you are racist. That doesn't happen.
Can I give the counter argument to that?
Yes, please.
Okay. This is the counter argument that I've learned about it, and I want to give a shout out real quick to Dr. Lowry Hart, and I mean it. I would never have thought about a lot of these ideas, and it's interesting because so many of the ideas that we've been, it's been a challenge.
Absolutely.
It's been a good intellectual challenge, and it continues to be, and it will continue to be. I have no doubt about it. But it has been a very, very good thing for maybe for my soul to be able to digest and work through, particularly the discernment.
Right.
Right, and that's what this seems to be about, is discernment. So what I would say that individuals supporting the anti-racism base would say that the definition of racism as being one person looking at, let's say, a white male looking at a female and saying, well, that's the weaker sex. Or looking at that would be sexism, right? And looking at a white male looking at a black male and saying that is and forgive me, but we're using historical terms here, looking at white males and saying, hey boy, right? We don't want to elevate the status of that human being to the level of man. And so the term racism itself is a term coined by individuals in the racist establishment to help prop up the system itself so that it doesn't look racist. And we don't challenge the system as being racist, but rather we look at people as being racist. And if it's only individual people that are capable of being racism, and the system is not capable of being racism or racist, then we are constantly discriminating without even knowing it.
Right.
That's my understanding of the counter argument as it's been proposed and the way that I'm trying to digest it in whole. And of course, we brought this up too with our Harvard profs whenever we were going through that class. I stayed afterwards for a couple of minutes and spoke with one of the guys that was at UT Austin, by the way, hook 'em horns, and he was very, very kind and very nice and very generous and gracious to give a portion of his time to answer this basic question, which was, about the definition. And I brought up the Merriam-Webster definition. Don't do this
to anybody. Hate that.
This is super controversial, and it shouldn't be. Merriam-Webster is the dictionary I go to when I'm looking up just about anything. And so when folks are looking for the definition of racism, why is the term racism such a loaded word as a definition, just a definition? I understand I can understand why the term racism is a very difficult concept.
Absolutely. Experiences, everything, but the definition, that's what, we talked about this over and over. We actually, before we even got on here, we were talking about this. And the idea is, if we don't have a same definition, a stable, consistent definition that we are working through together to talk about something, we're not going to be able to really talk about it. It's still going to be a lot of misunderstanding. Aaron brought up a great example. Like if my wife and I had a different concept, a different definition of marriage, it would make no sense for me and her to get married because our conversation about what it means is completely different. Like we had to have that understanding of what it means, the commitment, everything that goes into it before we would both understand and be able to even communicate about it. And I'm 100% on board with that. And so when and if anybody has a conversation about racism and, you tell, I'm open to tell everybody, my definition of racism is if you treat somebody different because of their race, right? That is racism to me. And I will tell anybody, I've had many conversations, and I tell them that, and then they come back and say, well, my definition is different. You can't just look in the dictionary. And it's like, well, then where do I look? I don't understand. And if it's different for every single individual, the idea of what their definition of racism is, there's not going to be any understanding. Right. And so it can't be an individual definition. Now, it can be an individual experience. Absolutely. And it will be different for every single person. The one thing it cannot be different is the definition, because then we have no understanding, right? We have to know exactly what it is we're talking about.
Right.
And once we know that, then we can start, really understanding something. But if it's going to change person to person to person, then that's not really the definition. That's just your experience with it. And yes, that will be different from person to person to person.
That's such an interesting thing. And it does a good job of relaying that. That was an example that we used, being able to define marriage, what it means, because it helps us with our expectations. So, I think we spent an entire weekend, we're Catholic, so they put us through the ringer. The diocese has different expectations, and Kelly and I we did so much more than what was required, and not because we're overachievers. We just we wanted an excuse to spend more time together. So I said, whatever allows us to spend more time together and talk to more married couples, I am happy to do that, because I probably need it. My definition was probably not on the same page, not because I was a bad person or anything. It's just my life experience up till that point was I had only knew what it was like to be a single man, and a bachelor, so not the Bachelor, by the way, not on, never was.
He was giving out a couple roses.
Right. Anyway, us being able to spend that time was some of the best time that we had. And I still think back on it because it helped us lay a foundation for how we should expect to have conversations and have conflict. When we had conflict, we had a common language to come back to that we both believed in, And if our experiences taught us that definition was different, then we had to do that, but we had to do it together. And we had to figure it out together. So making demands, as was done with Merriam-Webster, about the definition of racism being changed, demanding them or canceling them, or trying to cancel the dictionary, if that's even possible.
Don't tempt people.
It is possible, is the thing. So Merriam-Webster, though, being the academic, go-to for words, needed to change a subset or a subcategory of its definition in order to
and one thing I want
preserve
to
it.
Make sure you still, though, the definition is, and then it's 1A, but that happens with all sorts of words. So, I mean, yes, they can change, but the fundamental definition has not changed. But culture experience sometimes alters another possible explanation. So our definition. And therefore I just make sure that that's in there.
That's right. It's important to recognize that they never changed the core definition. And then, once again, that's not an attempt to, to get people to, light a fire and go and go get that definition changed. No, that's not what we're doing. The definition in Merriam-Webster is a belief that race is a fundamental determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. And that is something that I believe Beth just said, that was her definition of racism. That's how I was brought up to believe about people as well, that, being rich or poor, if I believe that I am a rich person and I pass somebody on the road that is poor, and I believe that I am inherently superior to that person for the simple fact that I have more money, that's a wrong idea of human beings.
Right.
And if I am a poor person looking at a wealthy person, and I am perhaps envious, or I am perhaps looking at the success that they have at a fiscal level, right? And these people may be very unhappy. But if I look at them and say there's a me and a them, and they are wrong just because they have more money than I do.
Yeah, and you don't even know them.
Don't know them.
You have no idea what they've been through.
Don't know what they've been through.
You don't know how much they've worked. You don't know where they started from. You don't know the experiences. You don't know the background. You don't know. And that's the thing. It's like even if I was told, I know it was another thing that somebody brought up, and they said, well, how can, and the question was, and I'm telling this because we have a group of authors that wrote a book, and it's a very interesting read. And a thing was brought up, the question was brought up, and one of the authors was speaking about it, and he said, how can I, he's a white man, how can I as a white man be held responsible what was done in my history? And he said, we are part of our history, just like if you went to the doctor for medical things. And it's like, you have to tell your history because it is part of who you are now. Yes, I get that. However, you don't know everybody's history. So just because now you see somebody who looks white. Okay, so I don't know if you guys, I don't know if I'm there. I have some of my students are on here. And even though it is Dr. Rodriguez, I'm blonde hair, blue eyes. I'm married. My husband is Hispanic, and I'm white. I look white. However, I'm actually Osage Indian. I am an 8th Indian. And, if you were to just look at me, you wouldn't know that. However, if we are really pushing this idea that we have to look at your past and not just what you look like now, then we are going to have to open up a whole new thing. And there are so many people that will not be in the category that, you're just racist because the people before you were, right? Because that's not how it works. I have a great classes. I have the best classes. And I had the most amazing student. I won't give her name, but she was talking we do this little thing in my lifespan where they talk about their life and, things that have really changed them. And she said, I'm just confused about so many things. She goes, because I am a little bit of everything. She's like, my grandpa's German, my mom is Hispanic, my dad is Hispanic, sorry. My mom is Persian. She is everything. And she's like, I'm just a melting pot. She's like, so therefore, when people talk about racism, the truth is if we just looked at, the German part, then if that's the way we're going, then she's automatically racist because that's what the history of was. She is nothing like that because she is her own individual. And I don't know where this whole idea of the collectivist idea has really come from. It used to not be here. We were very much this idea that we are individuals and you have your own individual uniqueness, which makes you, which makes your experiences and everything valid. For some reason, in the last couple of years, we have really been switching now to this idea of this collectivist. Just because you have one trait as somebody else in the group, you are now part of that group and you are responsible for things that happen within that group. And I don't know where that came from.
Well, part of the analogy that you just gave about that we heard from our authors about language of healing is a question of patient and doctor, right? Well, we know who the patient is in that analysis or in that analogy, right? Who is the doctor? That's what I want to know. Yeah. Who is the doctor? And that's an important thing because the doctor it needs to be somebody who is highly, knowledgeable about determining and being able to discern what matters about that those hereditary traits and what puts you at risk, but doesn't necessarily mean that it is going to happen.
Right. If you have cancer in your family does not mean you have cancer right now.
Right. It does survive as an analogy because I understand it helps people understand the idea of, things and how they pass on, how ideas get passed on. But I still question who is the doctor. If the doctor is a homogenous collective idea and that judges me based on the color of my skin, I will say that is not correct. I will not go to that doctor.
No. And you know what? And I just love that you even said who's a doctor because if we look at the doctor, he's there to make it better, right? That's his job. And so if it is not, then that's not a doctor and they don't need to know your history because they're judging you on the history instead of using that to understand where you're coming from.
Right. Yeah. And I think that to some degree you and I have visited probably ad nauseum about. I can't believe we're already 33 minutes in. Can you believe that, Beth?
No,
we have to be careful at an hour. We have to be careful because
y'all are going to stop listening.
Well, they'll get off their treadmills.
Yeah.
So this is an example. Michelle Alexander, critic of the criminal justice system, she wrote what is that? Her classic work. Her classic work is. I don't know. Oh well, we'll come back to it on another day because Michelle Alexander definitely deserves our attention. She brought to the forum a couple of other ideas. I didn't bring my books with me, so I am kind of underprepared. But anyway, she writes though that the war on drugs, cloaked in race-neutral language. Let's see, the new Jim Crow. This is what she wrote, and that's basically the imprisonment of African-American males. And by the way, even the term African-American, I have to put this out there that the term African-American, if you're talking to someone of color who does not want to identify as African-American, but rather as a black person, which, makes all the sense in the world, as a definition, as a self-identity, then, even that can be controversial. So and that differs from person to person. because it can be considered a microaggression.
Yes, that's what I was about to say, is the idea of a microaggression. And I'm sure that you guys, tons of people have heard about it because it is the, I don't know, hot topic, I guess, where we're talking about microaggressions. And it's really interesting how that is put out there. Okay, I'm going to give the example of what happened with me in a conversation. You were there, and someone told me that if they were to call me a stupid white Karen, it was not racist because I am, as a white person, I have more power. And I was like, what? I was like, that is racist. Because as soon as you introduce any race, that's when it becomes racism. And
not if you go by the other definition. And
exactly. And that's the point.
Yes. If somebody is coming from that other definition, that is not a racist statement, but rather just a statement of truth. It's a statement of fact that white people have been the dominant race, once again, coming from the race worldview, the worldview that race dominates everything. That race is, in fact, going to be something that if you are in a minority class of people, and we could get into talking about classism and Marxism and neo-Marxism, classism, caste system. We could get into talking about all of those different things, and that's a very rich, deep conversation to have. And I would absolutely welcome that type of conversation on this podcast. I think Beth would as well, and we would welcome anybody that is ready to have polite civil discourse over it onto our podcast, because we want to talk about it. But anyway, that particular mindset is not racist if you're talking to someone that is in a superior category in the worldview from race. If they believe that the system is racist and they are being oppressed, so you have the world is quite simply broken up into oppressor and oppressed.
Right. And of course that is someone, I understand what they're thinking. I just do not see that. I think that once that is the fact that you just said that if they said, well, it's not racist, it's racist if you said it, but not if I did. I think that, a lot of times they're like, oh, well, it's because you have the power. Well, who just gave it to me? Like, I didn't have it before. I'm not, putting that on you. There's nothing that I'm doing that says, oh, you know what? I'm superior to you, because I don't think that I am. But as soon as you tell me you are now the oppressor because you have more power than me, well, you gave it to me. So if that's how you see it, then it's because you have decided that. Because that's not how I feel. And I don't know when that comes into play, because it is very an individual thing. I'm not walking around like, oh, I've got the power. And if I did, which I don't, I think that even my students, I don't see me as, oh, they're, the person over them. Everybody, even when I talk about their grades, I don't give you a grade. You earn it. You earn that grade. So if I had the power to give you a grade, it's a different, and I don't feel like I do. I don't. You have the power to earn your grade. So I think that when we really look at it that way, it is not an uneven thing. That is something that somebody else is artificially putting in my point of view.
Wow, that's, okay, so Beth, you're saying that when we earn something rather than when we're given something, that it changes the whole perspective of power, because it puts the onus onto the individual and takes it off of the collective. Let me go back real quick to Michelle Alexander.
Sure, yeah.
The idea that the war on drugs itself was meant to be, maybe not even meant to be, but when it became the war on drugs, it was the outcome of it, because the system itself is racist, okay? That the outcome of the war on drugs was bound to affect the class of minorities, right? Of minority groups, whether that be black people or it be people of color, including Indigenous, which is BIPOC, a Black Indigenous people of color, which is a acronym that we've become more and more familiar with, and that the whole war on drugs is cloaked in race-neutral language. This is from the Merriam-Webster dictionary that has been revised, right, in the racism category. So it offered whites opposed to racial reform a unique opportunity to express their hostility toward blacks and black progress without being exposed to the charge of racism. And we call this coding, right? The ability to talk about people and talk about institutions and do it from a perspective of both the individual and the collective. And if we look at it from a social, economic, and political advantage, maybe, I don't know. I think that it's kind of a weird, this is such a difficult topic. It's so complex with so many roots that we could spend 50 podcasts talking about it. First of all, I love that about it.
Yeah.
The complexity. I think you do too, because it really gets us into this conversation about society, policy, individual, how we're brought up. It's essentially amalgam of just everything that we have ever experienced as people and as a society, both individually and collectively.
Sure. I mean, it is. It talks about, this whole idea is, you just brought up what it's called Bruff-Brunner's systems. And, you have your micro, your meso, your exo, and then the macro system. And and it just shows how in each of those systems, your immediate family, your biology, the person, the individual, and their own experiences within that make you who you are. Make you, how you're going to develop for the rest of your life. But it's not just that. It's also the mesosystem, the bigger constructs, the things that you're involved with, but maybe not even, directly, such as maybe your parents' job or even your parents' marriage. Those things, if something happens there, they get a promotion. Does it affect your development? Absolutely. Okay, even the way that they were raised as kids. Okay, this is what we do. We see it as parents. I know that so many times people are like, oh, I'll never be like my parents. 90% of the time you end up being exactly like your parents because that's how you were raised. So, and that's what we see. So even though it may not be the immediate, parent-kid relationship there, it could be 2 generations back, the way things were are the way things are now, which now affect your development. That your expectations, your motivation, your whatever else to get through the full development, right? I was really lucky. I didn't know, and this is really, I kind of giggle now, but I didn't know that you could not you had a choice to not go to college. I thought that it was just like everything else to education. You go to first, second, third, fourth, you graduate high school, you go to college. Because that is just the way that my parents were. And, I hear people, I took a year off, and I was like, you're allowed to do that? I didn't even know you could drop classes either.
Right.
I didn't know. But it was because, and everybody assumes, in grad school, you know what? I applied for one grad school. That was it. Because I didn't know. I thought it was just like everything. Nobody else in my family had been to grad school. So they didn't know either. But now that we know through experience, guess what? When my kids go to grad school, I hope, we'll see, it'll be, I know better now. I know what the expectations are. Because now I've experienced it. If you've never experienced it, you can't, push people to the next level. And until that individual decides to. Okay, my parents never told me I had to go to grad school. I did my own research and realized if I'm getting my degree in psychology, I can do one of 2 things. I can do a job with my bachelor's that almost everybody else can do, or I can go ahead and get my master's. And when I got into the program, which I got was at Texas Christian University, I realized that program was a PhD program, and it was like, well, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and do this now and just go ahead and get done. Nobody told me to do that, and I think I really, and of course, I've heard. that the reason I could do that or did that is because I'm white. And I don't know that that is true. I don't believe that. I think I did it because that's my personality. I did it because my parents always had these high expectations for me and kept pushing me to be better than I was before. And that is, I don't think it has to do with the race. I think it has to do with the individual. And I know people are going to disagree, and that's okay. I'm great. That's what the point is I've had many conversations where people disagree with me, and everybody's like, oh, and I'm like, you guys, this is the point. This is not something that's easy to talk about. So if you disagree, that's okay. And I'm not offended.
What about when somebody comes and says, that something is non-negotiable? Like if there are non-negotiables in a conversation, how does that influence and impact our conversations about race? Because that is something that gets brought up when we talk about racism, is that the definition itself is non-negotiable, right? And what that means, I mean, from what we're learning and what we've been doing and conducting our analysis, I would say, of the topic, the examination, everybody's come in with their preconceptions, their own experiences, all those different things. And how we're taught, I think, makes a big influence as well. What we're taught to say, how we're taught to say it, how we're taught to treat other people. And of course, we have formative times in our lives when that is more apparent than others. And I would argue we're always going to be learning. We're lifetime learners. I definitely preach that to my son. Yeah. You will always be learning something new, and keep your mind not, have your beliefs, and your principles, but always be ready to have them challenged, and that's okay. It's a good ability to be able to sit down with people that disagree. Well, how does it change that system though, where you can disagree, right? And what's interesting about this is that collective definition, which is the systemic racist precept to our conversation, changes the dynamic of being able to talk, because it takes the power away from individuals to even communicate, and makes the definition itself non-negotiable.
Right. And you know what? I've thought a lot about that because, of course, when we have these conversations, it usually starts with the individual. And, but, they're like, okay, well, maybe it's possible that not every individual is racist, but the system is. And, sometimes I understand where that concept comes from. But I guess my, the question I ask is, okay, if that's true, well, how are we going to fix it? If that is really the issue, is that the system is what's causing the oppression, then tell me how to fix it, because I'm not good at, I love to talk about things, but then it gets to a point where I'm like, okay, we're talking about it. Everybody's bitching about it. Let's fix it. Let's fix it now. And if you don't have a way to fix it, then stop bitching about it. And I know that sounds really bad, but it's for real. Stop. Quit yelling at people. Stop. That's not fixing it. That's just causing people to have a bigger wedge between your ideology and what we're really trying to do. If you really want to, not have this systematic racism, look, let's fix it. We're inviting people to the table for policy. Let's do it. Let's fix it, instead of sitting around and constantly talking about, oh, yeah, this person's right. This person's right. Okay, fix it. Fix the situation and let's do it. I'm down. Okay, tell me, if it is the reason we're saying that the systems are racist is because they were formed by white men, because that's who was starting the systems, right? But the colleges, the education, workforces, a lot of it was started by white men. And that is what the systematic racism is coming from, is that it was made by Therefore, it favors, and that's why we need to change it. And my question is okay, that's great. So how are you going to change it? Like, what do we do? Like, what's going to make it less of a suppressive or oppressive system?
Right. And this is not a new conversation. This is a very deep old conversation. And we have had this conversation in the country since its founding. Right. And there were times at the Constitutional Convention in 1787 in which people thought the whole thing was going to break down over the issue of slavery. Mm-hmm. Because at that time, there were people that acknowledged the system itself in the South. And I mean, many people argue in the North as well, was a systematically racist and structurally racist society. And it's easy to look back 200 years at people that have been gone, passed away 200 years ago and say, I'm going to pass judgment on this entire generation of people. And I don't believe that. I can't believe it. This is why. Because in 200 years, there will be people looking at us and they will pass judgment on us over one issue. Mm-hmm. Now, the issue might be big. The issue might be cattle.
Yeah.
The issue might be abortion. The issue might be genetic engineering. We don't know. It's very important to be a student of history and a student of life for this reason, so that we can try to be right. But on the base that we don't know the future and we can't tell what people are going to do or say, Nostradamus, right? Then we don't know what we will be judged on the big issues. And in this case, it doesn't matter how good your life was or what you did throughout your life or what you taught your kids or how you maybe tried to improve their lot in life, because you're going to be judged over one thing. Mm-hmm. And that one thing hopefully is not something that is going to condemn your entire generation, everybody, and group them into one category and say,
this
is my issue when we talk about the West.
Right.
The whole West, everybody in the West or everybody in the East. Mm-hmm. They don't all, and not everybody thinks the same way. We have different constructions.
Yes, I hate that. It is completely wrong to ever have if you ever, students out there, if you're ever taking a test and they say it is going to be false, because not everything, it is not an absolute. There's no absolute on anything. I know that that's something that everybody's learning, right? But you learn that everything is relative. There's not. Maybe there is a large quantity of people. There may be, a high amount, but it is never all. Because that's what you're saying. We're trying again, this whole collectivist. And what's really even crazier is that we're trying to, get away from the idea of being a stereotype and putting them, but that's exactly what we're doing. We're actually putting people in boxes more now than we were 5-10 years ago, right? This we talk about, each of the generations is more, it's different, and they're so much more open. And it's crazy because now I feel like people are being put into boxes so much more now than they were when I was growing up. And maybe I'm just more aware of it now. I'm not sure exactly what it is. But my kids, that's the difference, is my kids are aware that they have, this political party. Then this means that everybody who is this is that. And I think that is just, and I tell them all the time, nope, that's not true. We don't know.
Do you think that there is a deeply rooted, or even a root, maybe I shouldn't have just said deeply immediately, just a root in the number of people that continually feel more and more alienated, more and more marginalized, more and more disassociated with and unaffiliated with systems that include religion, that include political parties, that include discussion, and that alienation itself can become a group unto itself. And the disassociation and unaffiliation, the desire to not be a part of anything because you don't want to be judged for it, can cause its own set of problems in a society.
Well, I mean, it comes down to the idea of the extremes again. Like, if you're not, you're allowed to not be 100% this. You can. Like, you can agree with some things on one side and disagree with things on the same side. And then you can agree with things that are completely on the other side, because it's not all or nothing. And it's not black or white. It is not. There's always
ride or die. Vin Diesel. Gotta throw the Fast and Furious out.
It's not. I mean, right? There's always a little bit in the middle, right? You're not one thing. You don't have to be one thing or the other.
But passion breeds it.
Sure.
Which is why
absolutely
reason and principle has to be matched with reason. I mean, with passion. I'm sorry. So passion alone is so dangerous. Our framers knew this, how dangerous passion was, how dangerous the will of the people could be, the will of the majority, because they're often wrong. And we've found this throughout history that in certain situations when the people get too much power, and I don't mean this in an undemocratic way, understand, please, and I don't mean the party Democrats. This is another thing about language, right?
Exactly.
We have to please acknowledge that the term democracy is not a democratic word, and the term republicanism is not a Republican Party word. It is a phrase, a term that we use to explain the types of some demarcations in the political boundaries of definitions. Mm-hmm. So democracy itself, being the will of the people, can be dangerous. Mob mentality. It's what we talk about. Mob mentality.
Yeah. And I think that happens a lot with the extremes, right? You can even be someone who kind of is on one side, and then you get in with people who are on the extreme because they're angry because somebody's been, and then all of a sudden you are polarized because you have now, agreed with something, and then all of a sudden and I think maybe sometimes it happens and people are like, oh, wait, I didn't mean to be like, I'm not here. I'm not like full on extreme hate everybody, because that's not usually where people are. In fact, most people are somewhere in the middle. But there are, and those are the people who are the loudest. So when we see that, they're the people who post, they're the people who are in the media. Those are the people who are exciting. It's not the people who are in the middle are like, well, sometimes this makes it. Nobody wants to listen to them.
No.
They want to listen to the people who are like, these, I'm the best, screaming and yelling, and the other side who's screaming and yelling, because they have that full on passion and not as much reason. And I 100% agree with you that it has to be passion and reason. Is when you lose it, you become this extreme, and it's almost like you get lost in it. I feel like, maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, but I feel like a lot of people do get lost in that whole mob mentality and the idea that I'm here on this side, so I have to believe everything.
You have to be a purist.
Yes.
Well, you have to be a purist. And, everybody's guilty of this. The Tea Party in 2010, they were purists. They were a purist group of people that wanted exactly what they wanted, no conciliation whatsoever. However, what we found is that the Tea Party has become a part of a larger group. Even the caucus itself realized in the House of Representatives that the caucus itself had to make some conciliations, and otherwise it was not going to survive because they were just splintering the very ideas that they were wanting to help out with. And I mean, nobody can get everything they want. No. The Rolling Stones, right? No, you can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes,
you'll get what you need.
Also, you get what you need. So also, though, I mean, having been a young person myself, the idea and concept of love, right? Passionate love is fantastic.
Sure.
It's great. It's great to have passion and love. However, it's also important, equally important, to be able to think through it, right? Throughout it. Because passion alone is a fire.
It is.
It's beautiful, but it'll kill you.
Yeah.
And so anyway, that being said, we are obviously not using music. And there's a couple of reasons for that. But we are going to go ahead and wrap up our conversation today.
I think we'll probably visit this again just because there's so many things.
Oh my gosh.
I don't know, we might not do it right our next one or anything, just so we can have a breather from it and have people think and see if there's any comments of, what people have to say, or, if we have anybody who's like, you know what, it makes sense, or, oh my gosh, I totally disagree. And that's fine. Like, I don't know. I think we need to get back to that society of we can agree to disagree.
Sure.
And we can still be civil and we can still be listening. We don't have to be extreme.
Sure. Yeah. And thank y'all very much for listening. We will catch y'all on another episode. Thank y'all so much for your time.
Bye.
Bye.